What's going on, folks? Ted from Nerd Immersion here, and let's continue on the Spelljammer Adventures in Space coverage. So, we kind of got derailed a little bit there with all the 1D&D stuff, but I think I've covered that pretty much to the best of my ability at this point. So let's talk more about Spelljammer. We're going to go back into the Astral Adventuring Guide. For those of you unaware, that is one of the 3 books released as part of the Spelljammer box set. And there's a handful of different things that we haven't covered in the Astral Adventuring chapter. We talked a little bit about the new magic, both the magic items as well as the new spells. But this go around, I want to talk to you more about spell jamming, what it is, and then the ships and kind of the rules around the ships. I'm not going to talk to you about the ships themselves. There are 16 ships to cover, which we will cover in a future video. This also won't be covering things like temperature, weightlessness, air pockets, gravity, all that kind of things. I'll cover those in their own kind of dedicated videos because some of it is a little hard to understand, and if it's mixed in the greater scheme of everything here, you might just get lost. And I can also showcase, unfortunately, how minimal some of this information is regarding spelljamming and ships and ship-to-ship combat and things like that. There's not a lot there, unfortunately, and I'm kind of bummed out about it, and I think many other people have aired that complaint as well. And I can't help but wonder if that has something to do with the fact that the book is so small overall. Not necessarily referring to the 64, 68 page individual book, but that we're looking at a total of sub 200 pages with all 3 books combined, when something like Eberron Rising from the Last War was 320 pages, giving us at least 100 pages of extra content that's not contained within either of these 3 books. So, anyway, but if you look at this number, it has continued to go up almost daily, and that's thanks to all of you out there subscribing to the channel. So if you haven't already, it is one small, simple click for you, but it does quite a bit for me, so I'd really appreciate it. So let's head over to D&D Beyond, and we'll pull up the Astral Adventuring Guide. So we'll talk a little bit here about spell jamming, and then we'll talk about the mechanics for ships. So what is spell jamming and how does that work? So spell jamming is the act of using a spell jamming helm. We talked about spell jamming helms already, again, in that magic video, because a magic item, a spell jamming helm, is a magic item, and there's also a spell called Create Spell Jamming Helm. Essentially, this is, the whatever the system control unit of the Spelljammer ship, or whatever the spacefaring ship that you're using, the Spelljammer vessel, as it were. The Spelljamming helm is what controls it. For lack of a better term, it is a fancy chair that one sits upon that gives you access to the ship in almost like a psychic connection, right? And then if you are in there, you are allowed to operate the ship. If you are the one doing said operation, you are called a spelljammer. If that comes up in future terminology, you now know a spelljamming vessel is steered and controlled by a spelljamming helm, and the person in charge of doing that is a spelljammer. Okay? These things can move at ridiculous speeds. Think about any space show you've seen. Warp drive, warp speed, hyperspace. They can travel at 100 million miles in 24 hours if there are no obstructions in the way. These things can make, as you're traveling at lightning speed here, right? You can make minor course corrections to avoid little things, like maybe some meteorites or other kind of space debris. But when you start getting close to something else that has its own air envelope and its own gravity field, which we'll talk about that in a future video, that's where you need to slow down to your ship's flying speed, which is more like, standard cruising velocity, as it were. And then that's where you might have to actually do some steering. And they basically say that the amount of maneuverability that a spelljamming ship has is roughly the same as a nautical vessel of a similar size. So, right, if your space galleon is the size of a true traditional galleon of some kind, then that's the maneuverability you have. Okay, I'm not going to talk about the sensation involved with a spell. They basically say it's kind of like you have pins and needles, but they're not as painful, and you can essentially see. It also is kind of funky in a head trip because you can see as though you are anywhere on the ship. And the only other thing that's important to mention in this part is a Spelljammer Duel, which is where someone is essentially trying to, whether it be mutiny or pirates or what have you, take over control of the ship that you're on by assuming control of the spelljamming helm that exists there, or possibly trying to add a secondary one, right? So you can only have one spelljamming helm per vessel. But if a Spelljammer, a separate one, tries to gain control of the ship by using a secondary helm, or tries to take attunement from you, kind of a thing, a Spelljammer Duel ensues, which is where you basically have a contested Constitution check from both of them, and then you see whoever wins. If they tie, they reroll again. The person with the lower check loses, gains a d4 levels of exhaustion. Their attunement to the helm ends at once, and they can't attune to any spelljamming helms until all of the levels of exhaustion have been removed. And that's essentially all about what spelljamming and how that works. Again, like I said, there are some nuancy gravitational mechanics and air pockets and things, but that doesn't really fit into what I think is the scope of this video. So if we jump ahead to Spelljamming Ships, this is what talks about the actual rules for running the ships themselves. Again, there are 16 ships, which we'll cover in a separate video that I'll just call Spelljammer Vessels, and you can see all of the 16 options. But let's see. So it says you're going to need a crew, right? This is not a one-man show. This is, it's a vessel, right? It is a ship. The standard crew complement for a spelljamming ship includes one captain to give orders, one spelljammer to be the pilot of said ship, and one or more crew members to operate the weapons on the ship. Some ships carry extra crews, troops, backup spelljammers, passengers, perhaps cooks, chefs, things of that nature, right? Stuff you'd have on a regular ship. A ship that has more than a standard crew complement will degrade the quality of the air supply more quickly. Again, we'll talk about that in an air supply and breathable air envelope video. A spellcaster typically charges at least 50 GP per day, 50 gold pieces per day, to operate a spelljamming helm. So that's also something you can think about when you're doing running an adventure. You need some sort of spellcaster to be the spelljammer, and that could be your character, right? You could hire yourself out to people. Hey, I'll run the ship for you, or you might need to pick one up in a port or somewhere. Now, this is where a lot of people have a problem because they were hoping for extensive ship-to-ship combat rules. Now, there's basically almost nothing here. And it's unfortunate because as far as I remember, we did get a bunch of ship-based combat rules that were part of an Unearthed Arcana for nautical ships. But I don't think that ever actually even got published in Ghosts of Saltmarsh. I could be wrong, but I don't think we ever got a finalized version of that nautical rules. There was a bunch of different versions that existed, and I don't think we got a really good final version. So we don't even have that to fall back on. So starting distance is probably one of the starting pieces here. How far away are you from the vessel or the object that you're going to engage with? The DM decides how far away the enemies are from your ship. And we have three ranges. We have 250 feet, 500 feet, and 1,000 feet. 250 is long range for ballistas, mangonels, shortbows, longbows, light crossbows, and heavy crossbows. 500 is long range for longbows and mangonels, beyond the range of ballista and crossbows. And 1,000 feet is beyond the range of most ranged weapons. The DM presents a variant rule called Side Initiative. Or the DM's guide, rather, presents a variant rule called Side Initiative, which is ideal for ship-to-ship engagements, since it saves you the trouble of tracking initiative for individual creatures aboard each ship. Okay, so let's go ahead and pull up Side Initiative, because it doesn't actually tell us how it is. So recording initiative for each PC and monster, arranging everyone in the correct order, and remembering where you are in the list can bog the game down. If you want to run quicker combats at the risk of those combats becoming unbalanced, try using the Side Initiative rule. Under this variant, the player rolls a d20 for their initiative as a group or side, and you also roll a d20. Neither roll receives any modifiers. Whoever rolls highest wins the initiative. In the case of a tie, keep rolling until the tie is broken. When it's a side's turn, the members of that side can act in any order they choose. Once everyone on the side has taken a turn, the other side goes. A round ends when both sides have completed their turns. If more than two sides take part in a battle, each side rolls for initiative. Sides act from the highest to the lowest. Combat continues until the battle is complete. The variant encourages teamwork and makes your life as a DM easier, since you can more easily coordinate monsters. On the downside, the side that wins initiative can gang up on enemies and take them out before they have a chance to act. Alright, so shipboard weapons. A spelljamming ship typically has one or more shipboard weapons. Ballista and mangonels are most common. Such weapons are slow to load and fire. Player characters are almost always better off using their own weapons and spells in ship-to-ship combat, reserving shipboard weapons for targets that are too far away to be damaged by other means. So right out the gate, they're saying, like, yeah, you might have cool weapons on your spelljamming vessel, but don't use them, because they're not as good. Okay? Moving and steering a ship. A spelljammer can use a ship's spelljamming helm to move and steer the ship without expending their own actions or movement. On their turn, the spelljammer identifies how far the ship moves, up to its maximum speed, and decides whether to approach another ship or put some distance between the two. On its turn, a ship can be turned and reoriented so that all its weapons can aim and fire at any target within range, regardless of where they're situated on the deck. Then we have boarding. When one ship moves to within 5 feet of another ship, the spelljammer or pilot of the moving ship can maneuver alongside the other ship, enabling creatures to move safely from one ship's deck to the other. A ship that has enough movement can pull alongside another vessel, deploy a boarding party, and then move away, provided the members of the boarding party took the ready action to position themselves so they can move onto the vessel when it's close enough. So basically, this is what you've seen in any kind of pirate movie where one ship pulls alongside and everybody swings over on ropes. In that instance, you would have ready an action to position to swing onto the vessel or board the other vessel when the ship gets into position. Then we have crashing. A spelljammer can run their ship into an object or creature by moving the ship into the target space and making a special attack roll, a d20 plus the spelljammer's proficiency bonus, against the target's AC. If the attack roll hits, a crash occurs, otherwise the target moves out of the ship's path, avoiding the crash. If the DM decides that a crash is unavoidable, no attack roll is necessary, and the crash occurs automatically. When a spelljamming ship crashes into something that could reasonably damage it, both the ship and the creature or the object it struck take bludgeoning damage based on the size of the struck object, as shown in the crash damage table, which we'll get to in a sec. If the ship runs into something that doesn't have hit points, such as a planet or a moon, apply the damage only to the ship. Makes sense. The ship stops after crashing into a gargantuan or immovable creature or object. Otherwise, the ship can continue moving if it has any movement left, and whatever it struck moves to the nearest unoccupied space that isn't in the ship's path. After resolving the effects of the crash, determine whether the ship's gravity plane is suppressed. We'll talk about that in the gravity plane video. If the suppression of a ship's gravity plane would cause the creatures on or inside the ship to fall, they fall in whatever direction is appropriate. To determine the damage from falling, see the player's handbook. And here is the crash damage. Large is 4d10, huge is 8d10, and gargantuan is 16d10. This is the size of the creature or object struck, how much bludgeoning damage it's going to be. And then we have ship repairs. Non-magical repairs to a damaged ship can be made while the vessel is berthed. Repairing 1 hit point of damage to a berthed ship takes 1 day and costs 20 GP for materials and labor. Damage to shipboard weapons can be repaired just as quickly, 1 hit point per day, but at half the cost. The mending spell is cheaper, less time-consuming, is a less time-consuming way to make repairs. Casting mending on a damaged ship or shipboard weapon restores a number of hit points equal to the target equal to 1d8 plus the spellcaster's spellcasting ability modifier. The target can regain hit points from that spell no more than once per hour. That's actually huge if you think about it, right? So it's 1 hit point per day for 20 GP worth of materials, whereas mending will get you in, I think, a 1-minute casting, hit points equal to a d8 plus your spellcasting mod. So, I mean, at the minimum, if your spellcasting mod is 1, you're at least shaving a whole day off. But if it's higher than that and you roll higher on your d8, you could be shaving weeks, if not more so, off of the time it takes to repair this ship. And again, it's only once per hour, but you could do that, again, multiple times per hour if you have multiple people with mending, or just you want to devote your time to just doing that as opposed to having to wait a hit point per day as per the base mechanic. So it does seem that if you are going to be someone who is on a spelljamming ship, and are part of this crew in some way, getting yourself someone with mending on board, if not multiple people with mending, seems like a good call. And that's it. I just covered all of the mechanics regarding spelljamming, considering the beginning was just basically describing to you what spelljamming was. That's all of the mechanics that exist for this, right? The next section here is just the breakdown of all of the 16 different ships, how they're built, who built them, and then it talks about what weapons they have, sure, if they happen to have any. It lists things here, and you can view unlabeled versions. Right here's what it has: ballista, giant cannon. I thought we were going to maybe have rules for how to make our own ship, Maybe we would have rules for weapons outside of basically just the siege weapons that are contained in the DMG. So we'd have some options for some other cool stuff. Or like, again, I feel like we had a lot more rules for like building an infernal war machine in Baldur's Gate Descent into Avernus than we do for building a spelljamming ship or vessel in a ship and a whole campaign setting that's been asked for so long that people would love to build their own spaceships. Instead, you basically have to pick from one of the 16 existing ship variants and then kind of maybe tweak it after the fact. I don't know. Maybe that's just me, but I was hoping for a little more, especially on like, where is it? Our ship to ship combat is like, figure out how far away they are, roll initiative, maybe use this thing from the DMG, and then like you can move it, and then you can board or you can crash. And that's it. There's no like actual, I don't know. I felt like I wanted more mechanics. I don't know. Maybe, like I said, maybe I'm way off base here, and you guys please correct me if you feel differently in the comments, but I do feel like there is not a lot of information here, and it's kind of disappointing as I feel like, and again, maybe that shouldn't be the main focus of a Spelljammer campaign, but it arguably should be a decent focus, right? The whole being in space and doing the space battle thing, right? Like if you were to go buy a Star Wars game and yeah, it was a boots on the ground, you're playing a stormtrooper, you're playing a Jedi, whatever, that's fun. But perhaps you also wanted to fly around in a TIE fighter or an X-Wing, and you would hope that the mechanics for that were also good. Or maybe maybe I should think more in terms of older games like that, where like you could have your Rogue Squadron where you played the game in space, or you could have your, your Battlefront, where you're on the ground and that's how it works, right? So you can either have the boots on the ground playing your Dungeons and Dragons with your new Spelljammer kind of races, I guess, because there's not even really magic or classes. Playing, Spelljammer on different planets and in weird settings, or you could have a spacefaring combat system in it, but you can't have both, is kind of how I'm reading it. Like, yeah, this is a part of it, sure, space combat, whatever, just figure it out. But mostly do the other thing. I don't know. Again, I've said it before, Dungeons and Dragons is a great game for if you want to play specifically Dungeons and Dragons. There are better games, I'm sure, that handle space combat a lot better. So if that's what you're looking for in your game, your RPG of choice, perhaps look into the other options that are out there. So anyway, let me know your thoughts and opinions in the comments down below, and be sure to stay tuned as I will be covering, again, the vessels, the mechanics of how the different things work, and then eventually from there we'll move into the monsters and talk about all the cool new monsters that were added, which is definitely one of the biggest assets added to the game as part of Spelljammer Adventures in Space. I'll see you next time.